Now let's have a look at Angular CLI or Angular Command Line Interface and see what are the things it can provide. So the first thing you should remember is that after installing Angular, the ng keyword is reserved for Angular. Ng means and stands for Angular. So whatever command which we want to use to use the Angular CLI, we start with ng. Now, before using the Angular CLI, let's just have a recap on how did we install the Angular, and we'll check the version of Angular and other things which we installed. So I will open my terminal. In Windows, you can use PowerShell, or in Mac, you can use your own terminal. I will show you with this here. Let me zoom in more further. Now, how did we install the Angular was we used the npm to install Angular, and we wrote npm install -g, which stands for global, and then we used @ Angular /CLI. After running this command, it executes and it installs the Angular command line interface. And similarly, we installed TypeScript. So to install TypeScript, we wrote npm, which stands for Node Python Node Package Manager, then npm install -g for global, which means you can access this Angular and TypeScript anywhere. Please don't forget to add this -g while running this command. Otherwise, you will not be able to run the Angular projects from anywhere inside your machine. Then then we type TypeScript to install the TypeScript language on our local machine. So don't forget to run these two commands. They will install the Angular and TypeScript. Both are very important for running the Angular project. Now, if we just write ng and hit enter, let's see what it does. So it shows us some commands which we can run, which means we have the Angular installed in our local machine. Let's clear this. Now let's write ng 2 slashes then help. We see that the ng help is showing us something, which means okay, our Angular has been installed perfectly. Now let's create and while creating, let's try to understand what exactly is a command line interface and how can we actually make a project in Angular using command line interfaces. So command line interfaces, as the name suggests, are the commands which we write in our terminal. Uh, so as we know that ng is a keyword reserved for Angular, so every command will start with ng, and then there are few commands which we want our Angular to do. Like first is we want to create a new project, so we'll write ng, then a new, then the name of the project. We can now let's have a project which says hello-world, and we run it. So this command means uh, Angular create a new Hello World project. Now it asks us to if we want the made like help from the angular.static.io. Then we say yes. Would you like to add Angular routing? We say yes. Then it asks for which type of cascading style sheet would be like. So for now, let's just hit enter and use CSS only. Then it takes time. As you can see, npm is installing something, and you can see a lot of create and the file names are there. It's all that the Angular is creating all the necessary files which will be needed inside of a project. So it is collecting and creating all those files, and it is assembling inside the project, which we will see later when it completes the whole project. So as you can see, there's a tick sign there and it says package installed successfully, which means the Angular project have been made. Now let's see what does it made. Let's open our code text editor here with the help of code dot, and we see there's a hello world project, hello world folder made by the Angular inside our working directory. When we click on this hello world folder, we have lot of files. Please note that you need not to worry about all these files which the Angular has generated. At the end, we'll be working with some specific set of files, and these all other files are just for hosting the project and for security purposes, which we need not to worry while learning. So uh, we'll click, we see there's a lot of files. Let's see what is inside the src folder, which stands for source. We have app assistant environment. There's a lot of files. There's some testing main.ts, and there are very different files. Let's just click on app, and we're still getting some HTML files. If we extend this, there are HTML files, CSS file, and TS stands for TypeScript files. So there are basically a lot of files, but there is one index.html file. This we know that it is the one which is used to make our HTML page. Now let's go back to our terminal and let's minimize this text editor. Now we'll use the ng keyword again, or the Angular CLI, and we will serve our project, which means we will start the Angular project. And to do that, we use ng serve. You can also use dash dash open, which will open it directly into your browser. But now I'll just use ng serve and hit enter. And please remember to go inside the folder, the project folder which was just created. I can say ls and it will give me the folder, and the folder name is the name of the project. So cd hello world, and now use ng serve. So it takes a bit of time to start the project, and now as you can see, you cannot do anything on this terminal as it is preoccupied by Angular. So if you scroll up here, you can see the Angular Live Development Server is listening on the local host colon 4200. Open your browser on HTTP localhost 4200. I'll copy this link, and let's go on to this link, and we'll see what exactly is there. So this is what we get when we go to this localhost uh, colon 4200 site, and this is the hello world website which Angular made by itself. This is the hello world program or the hello world project which is auto generated at the time we run our Angular project. So it looks very interactive, and let's see how does the Angular made this whole project. Now we can go inside our text editor to have a look inside the project. As we earlier saw, this index.html file is the thing which we know from earlier that it is the one who is supposed to have all the HTML component which the page have. So let's click on this. We see, yes, it is the one. We have the doc type HTML declaration here, and this has the HTML page which we're looking for. So this page must be the one who is generating our hello world program within the Angular. So let's inspect this HTML page. So there is some information in the head and the title says hello world. Let's see if the title of our page is also hello world. As you can see, the title of our page is exactly same as there. So this is the HTML code for generating of this page. Now let's go back to that page and we see, yes, this is the page you're looking for, but in a body, we see only one element, and that is not the standard HTML element. We did not learn about the app root element. We did not learn about this in our HTML course. So what is this app root and where is it coming from? And how does the only one element generated all of this such a nice, beautiful working page? How can one element have all of these features? Because there is nothing else inside body and all the page is generated with the code inside the body. So this is something which we need to reverse engineer. Let's look more into this app uh, page. And now let's like one more step we can do to verify is that we can add an h2 element here. We can add an h2 element and we can say this is the page we are looking into. So let's save this file and go back to our web page. And if we refresh it, so we saw something coming. This is the page we are looking into, but it's going away. Now let's comment this and we'll see what it happens. As you can see, we did not even refresh the page, and this is the page we are looking into got printed onto the page. This is because as you can see in the terminal, it says it's the Angular live development server. The server is live, which means whatever we do, it gets instantaneously compiled and worked by the Angular, and the results are displayed onto the page. We need not do the refresh part. So let's get back to our code and let's delete this h2 part and uncomment this app root and save our file, and we get back to our page and it's working as before. Now let's inspect how are we generating this app root element and how are we getting all that page. We can see within this app folder there are some files, and there's also one HTML file which says app.component.html. Let's have a look into that HTML file. And it says the content below is only a placeholder and can be replaced. Delete the template below to get started with the project. So let's go ahead and let's delete everything and let's save our file and we'll see and let's see what it does. Now, when we go back to our hello world page, it's completely empty now. Let's try to add something inside our app.component.html file. Let's say we write then h2 and right here, this is the real HTML file. Let's save this. And once we go back to our hello world page, we see the h2 element getting printed. Note that we did not write any doc type or HTML tag here. We directly added the element h2. And it's still getting printed on the web page as if this is the real website. So somehow all the content which is inside this app.component.html is getting added inside this body where there's only one element, app root element. So this is what the Angular is doing. It's helping us to break down the whole element, whole pages into some elements which we can add inside our body and can simplify our life as if it's look very simple, and we can make multiple such elements and can make our whole web page shorter. As this file is called app.components, so this must be the component which we are making. So let's replace this text with our hello world, and let's go back to our site, our web page, and we can see hello world is being printed here, and we did not even refresh the page. So this is the hello world program we just made while inspecting the files within the Angular. Let's get back to our slide. So you saw how we use the ng new, then the name of the project hello world, and ng serve to build and serve the application. Similarly, there are ng generate component, then the name of the component, and ng generate serve name. These two are the more commands which we can use in Angular. But first we need to learn about what are components and what are service. So first thing we'll need to learn is what are exactly the components. Let's try to generate a component and see what exactly are components and what are the things they do. So let's get back to our terminal. And as this terminal is being preoccupied by the ng serve, we will need to open a new terminal in the same folder. Let me zoom in. Now we'll use ng generate component and then the name of the component. Let's say the name of the component is first, only first. Now hit enter. As you can see in the terminal, there are the four files which says created. Then there's a source and there's a path to that file. There are four such file and there's one uh, element which is getting updated, and there's a location of that file. Now let's see in our text editor what are these new files and what is inside these files. Let's minimize this and let's get back to our code editor. As we can see, there is a new folder here inside our app. Let's close these files, which is in green. That's why we could recognize them as green stands for new one. So there is this first folder which is being generated. And as we can see in our terminal, it says the first folder, the four files are inside the first folder, which are inside source then app. So we are inside the source then app, then there's this first folder. Now let's click on this first folder. We see there are four files as they are all green, which means they are being created. And here in the terminal, we can see there are these four files. The first one is first.component.css. It is the first file. Similarly, the HTML, the component.spec.ts, and the last component.ts. So these are the four files. And there is one file which is getting updated, which means there is some text being inserted inside that. Let's look at that. And it is in the source app and then the app module.ts file. As it is yellow, yellow means it has been updated. So this is that file which we are saying. And so these are the four files and one file which were getting updated. Now let's look into what is inside this first component.html. So within this first component.html, we have a p element which says first works. So note that even inside this component, we don't have the full HTML page. We just have the the content which should go inside the body of the main page. And let's look at this first component.ts file also. So we have, if you see, we have something here as a selector, which is app first. Then we have a template URL, which gives the location of this HTML file only. And we have a style URL, which gives the first.component.cs location inside a list. So this refers to something as this is the file which is telling the Angular that this is the template URL. This is where the HTML is for this component, and this is where the CSS part is for this particular component. And so this is the this first component.ts file should be the one which handles all the JavaScript of this page. So this is similar to what we were actually seeing first. Uh, where we had app.component.html, app.component.css, and app.component.ts stands for TypeScript. So that is something which is parent component, and this first is something like a root component, which is inside because the folder is inside that app folder. So let's try to do the same thing and let's use this app selector and try to understand what exactly is this app selector. Uh, we copy this app selector, as we know that we can use this app selector and like can convert it into an HTML tag and can use it inside that HTML to generate the page. So we'll go inside this app.component.html where we earlier wrote the hello world. Now, after that hello world, let's write this app first. And as the HTML ending tag was automatically generated, let's save this file. Let's get back to our main page and we see the first work is getting printed here. So uh, we are doing the same thing again. We have made this element, the HTML element, a custom HTML element which is actually a component only. And with that component, we have defined what it should show and what are the style and what are the logic inside these three files, which are inside the first folder. Now let's try to change this first work HTML element and say this is our first component. Let's save this and then get back to our website and we see this is our first component getting printed here. So this is what a component is, and similarly, we generate the whole website using these small components. So it's easy to change a particular component and reuse each component as we did in this HTML file. We just need to add this app component and we can hide this. We can comment this to hide the whole component. So we need not to worry, look into a lot of different files to comment out a particular section. So this is how the component works. Let's get back to our side. So the first command which we ran to generate our component was ng generate component, then the name of that component we use first here. And these are the code which was already written in the HTML in the first component .ts file. So you can also use a shortcut if you don't want to type this whole command. You can use ng g for generate, c for component, then the component name. And they were the four files, and these and every file we studied that they are linked to the component.ts file, which is where the Angular sees exactly where are the HTML file and where are the CSS file, and it sees the logic inside that component.ts file. Let's look at some examples of components in Angular. If we look onto this website, we can see that there is one card and these are two exactly same cards, but earlier while our approach in HTML, CSS and JavaScript, we need to copy paste the whole uh, element which was creating this particular card. We need to copy paste it 3 times. Uh, then it would have made us this page. Now, if we want to do something similar with the help of components, we can do that by we can just copy paste this app first 3 times here, and when we go back to our page we see our these three first component getting printed 3 times, although we have made this component only once. So we need not to actually write it again and again. We just make it once and can use it wherever we want and how many times we want. Now let's study about data binding. So what exactly is data binding? Data binding is the flow between template and the component class. In short, it means how we can transfer the data from the TypeScript code to the HTML page. Or we can say that if we have if I have some data in some variable which is inside that class which we have defined in the component, uh, from that the variable needs to go to HTML file. Right now these two things are in different files. So how can we actually convert this? How can we transfer this variable into into the HTML file? So let's look into our code and we'll see how we can do that in different ways. So we open our text editor uh, and there let's delete this. This is our first component.html file. Let's delete this uh, and also delete this paragraph tag. Let's write our h2 tag here. And within this h2 tag, we'll use two curly braces. And within this two curly braces, we can write our JavaScript now. Or you can say we can write our TypeScript, some some part of TypeScript now. So what if I write 1 plus 1 here? Let's save this and let's go back to our page. We can see 2 here. So the JavaScript is when the Angular comes on this to code, it sees the two curly braces. It knows that whatever is inside it is a JavaScript code or a TypeScript code, and it executes it, and then the value becomes 2, and whatever the value is, it gets printed because the value is in h2 is in between the h2 element. Now we can use this and we can print our variables which we can define inside the class, this first component.ts file. So to define a property inside this class, before defining a property, we should know that each property of classes can be private or a public. So if the property is public, it can be accessed from outside. If the property is private, then it cannot be accessed from outside, which means every private property cannot be accessed from HTML class. So to define a public or a private property, we just write public. Then let's say x is our message is our variable name and it is of type string, and that string is equals to hello from component 1 or first. And to define it as a private, we just use private keyword. So by default, if nothing is given before this variable or a property, by default it is public, so it can be accessed from the HTML file. So we have defined our message property and it is equals to hello from component first. Let's save this and let's go to our HTML file, and within these two curly braces, let's use this message variable and let's save our file, and we'll go here. This is our HTML page and it says hello from the component first. So this value is being printed is this variable message, and this variable message is the message is a property which we defined inside the class. So this is how a property which is defined inside a class of the component is getting transferred to HTML page. And this is the data binding, and what we are doing is called interpolation. So this is how we do interpolation. Similarly, there are other ways, and this type of data binding is one directional. That's why it's called one directional data binding. So the other forms of one directional data bindings are property binding and event binding. Let's see how we can achieve those. So in property binding, we have class binding and style bindings. So let's first make some classes which we can actually implement inside our code. So we'll go to our first component.cs file, and inside this, let's create some classes. As we remember from the CSS, to create a class, we write dot, then we write the class name, and then within the curly brackets, we define the CSS for that particular element. Now let's define three different type of text so that we can apply them using Angular. Let's say this is equals to text success, and within this text success, the color of the text is green. And similarly, we can have another class which says text danger, and the color of the text is red. Similarly, we can say another property like italics, and the font style is italic. So we have these three classes. How we can use Angular to achieve or to apply these classes onto some HTML element. So within our HTML page, we select the element which we want to be applied, this property to be applied. We go there, and there we use some here we use an argument, and to use an Angular argument, we use this ng class inside this square bracket. So this is the input from Angular. This part is coming from Angular. So within the square bracket, we use ng class, and right in front of it, we give the variable name, or here we can write the JavaScript or the TypeScript. So let's leave it right now, and we'll go back to our component.ts file, and here we will define that object which will be passing in the HTML file, which will define how and which class should we apply to that h2 tag. Now inside this class, let's define an object which is message class, and this is equals to our first class was text success, and this is equals to maybe true. Similarly, we have text danger, and this is equals to, let's say, false for now. Similarly, we had text italics, and this is equals to false for now. So we have defined our message class, a message class object, which will be passing into an HTML. It takes all the classes which we want to apply and a boolean in front of it to specify either we want to apply it or not. So we take this message class object name and we go into our ng class equals to this object. Let's save this and let's delete this message, or we can state, and let's go back to our slides. And we can see on our web page the class, the text class which was active right now was text success. That's why the text color converted into green. Now let's open it side by side. Now if we make the text italic equals to true, as we save it, the page automatically reloads and we have the text italic class along with text success class. Now let's make this false and save it. And the page automatically refreshes and it's only italic now. Now let's activate the text danger class using true right in front of it. So we have text italic and text danger at the same time. So this is how we use another binding method. It's called property binding, because we are binding the property of this h2 element with the help of square brackets and inside it using ng class. Similarly, we have ng style. So let's make a new element. Let's say another h2, and inside this we give ng style, and this will be equals to again some object. As we did it in ng class, similarly we'll make a new object for ng style, and let's say this is equals to message style, and this object will contain the styling for the particular element. Let's say the color is blue and the font style is italic. So we have made an object which will go to the ng style tag. We copy this element or the property, and in front of ng style, ng style property, we give that object, and inside this h2 we can write this is angular styling. Let's save this and go back to our page. We can see the text is the CSS is being applied onto that element, and all the CSS is actually coming from the TS file. This is where we have defined what the CSS should be, the style should be, and with the help of ng style, we have applied it onto an element. So this is again a property binding, because we are defining a property of an element with the help of the TypeScript code. And the last one of the one-way binding is event binding. What is event binding? Event binding is something similar to how we used to work with DOM events. So here we can have a DOM event and we will bind it to some variable or some object inside our TypeScript code. So let's have a button, and inside this button, let's have a variable We'll call this variable as button variable pt, and let's define this pt here, and pt is of type string, and this is says please click me. Let's save our code and let's go back to our page and let's see we have got the button here which says please click me, and it does nothing on clicking because we have not attached any DOM event to it right till now. Now let's attach a DOM event using Angular, and we can do that uh, using our event binding. So we go back to this button, and here now we use parentheses, and inside this parentheses we say click. Now if the click is equals to, here we give the function or our method from a class which from the type which was inside the TypeScript code. So let's say this method is on click, and because it's a method and it's a function, so we'll give a parentheses. So let's define this on click function or a method inside our class here. So we'll say this is our on click method, and uh, this is of type void, and within the curly bracket we can change this pt variable and can change the string inside the button. So we'll say to access the public variable of this class, now we'll use this property as we studied earlier. To access them, use this keyword, then this, then pt. Now we can change this pt variable, the string inside it, and we can say you clicked. Now let's go back to our page, and we see here the button says please click me. And after we click it once, it says you clicked because the DOM event click was attached to it, and on to that click function, we have this on click method binded to it. And what this on click uh, method does is it changes the variable data, and now the string says you clicked, and as it happens all automatically, the variable which is inside this button, the value changes, and as soon as we click it, the message changes along with that. So we see the new and updated message. Let's get back to our slide. So these are the one-way data binding which we just saw. The interpolation, the first one, there within this two curly braces, we give the JavaScript code or a TypeScript code, or we can simply pass in the variable name which we want to be printing here. Then we studied about the property binding. For the property binding, we use ng class and ng style. Please note that for property binding, we use square brackets, and for event binding, we use parentheses. So within this square bracket, we give the ng keywords, and those ng keywords were ng class and ng style. And ng class and ng style, in front of that, we gave the objects, and these objects were the one governing which class should be applied onto that particular element. And with the ng style, we can pass in the whole styling object, which in turn decide which property should be changed according to that object. Lastly, we use event binding. With the event binding, we give the event, the DOM event, inside this curly braces. That's why there's a difference. Within the square bracket, we give the Angular keyword, and within this parentheses, we give the JavaScript events or the DOM events. And within this parentheses, we give click, and that was equals to one method which we defined on click. And as it was a method, we gave it with the parentheses. Now let's look at what exactly is template reference variable. Let's go to our code again, and here assume we want a search value to be given inside a variable, a TypeScript variable. Suppose we have a search box and there a user enters something, and whatever he or she enters, we want that value to be saved inside our variable. So we can do that using our reference variable like this. So first we know how do we make this reference variable. So let's create our search box. We use input, and then whatever we type inside this input, whatever we type inside this input, we can extract it using this element's value gets changed and we can extract it from its value. So as in normal JavaScript, we in normal HTML also, we give an ID to particular element so that later in JavaScript we can refer to that ID and can operate onto that element and extract the values. Similarly here, we don't have to write that much of code. We just need to give a hashtag, then the ID or a variable name to this particular element. We can say it's my ID. And now in this whole HTML, we can refer to this element as my ID element. Now suppose uh, we also want to print whatever is being searched inside this input box whenever this button is clicked. So let's create a new h3 element, and inside it we give the search variable, which we'll define later in our class. So and on click method, now we can give it this my ID element. So now whatever is behind this hashtag is the variable, and we can use this variable name and we can give it and pass it to this function, and this whole element is will go inside this is being transferred to our class basically. So let's go back to our TypeScript code, and here uh, like earlier we didn't had anything, so we need to give it we like now we have a value in the parentheses. So let's define this as some element, and it can be of type any because we don't know what type of HTML element will be. So let's give an element parameter, and it can be of type any. And let's comment this out now. Now from this element, we want to get its value because this element is the input element. So element dot value will have that string or a text which is being searched. So we want this to be equal to the search variable which we defined inside this h3. So let's first define the string variable or the property here, search, and it is of type string, and this is right now an empty string. So now to access this search property, use this keyword, then search is equal to this element's value. And this is equals to this element's value. Now save this and go to our page again. So right now we don't have that h3 because right now there's nothing inside this input field. That's why the search string has nothing, and that's why nothing is printing here. Now let's say this is an input, and then we click onto this button. This is an input get printed here. Now I'll change this text. This is still an input, and click on this button again, and this text get changed again. We did what is something similar to as defining an ID, then extracting its element and assigning it to some other division and other values. But in Angular, we can do it simply using element reference element variable, and we can just define and give it some ID using hashtag, and we can use this inside of any JavaScript code. We can give this variable name, and then we can access its property in the code itself. So this is how we do template reference variable. Let's go back to our slide. So see, we use hashtag then a variable name inside of a HTML element. So in JS also we could access this element using DOM tree and read the element as element.value, which is something similar what we are doing in the TypeScript also, but it's just a bit shorter there. In Angular, we could use template reference variable, which is much more easier, obviously. Now let's get ahead and see what exactly are two-way binding, because till now, whatever we learned will fall into one-way binding. Data was only going from one direction to other. But is there a way? Can we do the similar thing which we did, type in the search box, and without clicking it, can it go to back and come to the front at the same time? That is something we do in a two-way binding. So now let's look at the two-way data binding. The two-way data binding means there will be data flow between template and a component class at the same time, which means now we don't have to make an event like earlier we were pressing a button to send a data from input to a variable which was inside of a component and then printing that variable onto our HTML page using interpolation. So this can be shortened using this two-way data binding, and for doing a two-way data binding we use ng model. And note that this ng model is used within a square bracket, and then inside the square bracket we have these parentheses. So why we do it like this? Because this is how we get two-way binding within the square bracket. uh, then within the parentheses, this emphasize that uh, the the variable which you're using will be two-way binded. So let's see with this, with some example, we'll try to create the same input field and try to print what we are giving as an input, but without using any button. So let's see how we can do that. We'll open our text editor. So this is where we are printing search. Now let's create another input, and let's use a two-way binding using a square bracket. Inside there's a parentheses, and we say ng model, and this is equals to some variable which will save our data. So let's just say it is equals to query, and we'll close our input. And next, in the next line, we can use in the next line we can use a paragraph tag, and inside this paragraph tag we can print this query variable using interpolation. Now let's go to our first component.ts file to actually make this query variable and define it here. So let's have a query variable of type any is equals to an empty string. So we'll save this, and when we go to our web page, we see there's some error. And this error says, if you look at it, it's failed to compile. And why is it fails to compile? Because it cannot bind the ng model since it is not a known property of input. So it means right now the Angular does not know what this ng model means. Like earlier, we gave it ng class, ng style. It knew everything, but this ng model thing, it does not know. This is because by default, the ng model is not loaded or is not imported. So to import it, we need to go to app.modules, app.module.ts, and inside this you will see a list in front of imports. So this is where we import all the modules which we will be using. So this ng model is in the forms module, and the forms module is not imported by default. So let's try to import it with the F capital. We use forms module. So when you type the forms module, you will get two options. One without the string after it, and one is just the forms module. So if you click on the other one with some string after the forms module, it will automatically import it from the location, which you might not know, but this will automatically import it from the location wherever the forms module is. So try to use that, and let's save, and let's go back to our site. So it gets updated and it's working. We have this new input field. Let's try to write something, and at the same time it is getting printed on the next line. It's getting printed at same time, and at the same time it's getting deleted. This is because with the help of two-way binding, at an instant we write something inside this input that is binded to a variable which is being printed here, and it's as because of its binded in two-way, the data is continuously going and coming back to on the HTML page. At that's why it's we are seeing this thing editing continuously because of two-way binding. So this is how we did a two-way binding with the help of ng model.